Here's Paul Levine coming to you from California, and we're going to talk about income tax impacts all commercial transactions. And maybe you can explain what you mean by that. Yeah.
My name is Paul Levine. I am a commercial realtor and a real estate income tax consultant. I am based in Los Angeles, California, but I do work all over the country wherever income taxes are covered by the Internal Revenue Code. I was a practicing CPA for over 50 years. So I have more income tax education, knowledge, creativity, experience, and expertise than anyone else out there. Nobody else has 50 years. So let me bring you up to date and tell you why I'm here. Every commercial transaction has an income tax effect. Everybody who has ever done a 1031 exchange is sitting there going, no, I didn't have to pay income taxes. Well, just because you didn't have to pay income taxes at that point doesn't mean that there isn't an income tax effect for the transaction. You may have to determine what your gain or loss is. On a 1031 exchange, you have a couple of things to remember. Number one, you have to remember that you have 45 days to pick out the property that you're going to use in the 1031 exchange. And then you have a whole 180 days, a half of the year, to complete the transactions. You don't meet either of those two criteria, you're in hot water, because the IRS is very down on people that try a Section 1031 exchange and don't make it. By the way, I just heard myself speaking to you and telling you about my experience. I was also a university professor for 6.5 years, and I have been a commercial realtor for the last 9+ years. The Los Angeles Police Department motto is protect and serve, and so is mine, but in a different way. I'll tell you a story. I had a client in Sherman Oaks, California, and they were selling a mixed property, a single family residence and 5 stores on the same lot. And the two people that owned it were sisters, and they were both in their 80s. And what I did was I went in and I made sure that we had everything in order, that we had a good offer, that we presented the property properly, that we did all of the things correctly by checking all of the boxes. But then there's one box that I checked that I'll bet you no other commercial realtor ever thought of, and that is I brought in an estate and trust attorney. Because when you have two sisters who never saw millions of dollars, the sales price was $4.6 million, and there was no mortgage on it. So my job was to keep the taxes down, and the attorney's job, the estate and trust attorney's job, was to make sure that they were protected, that the asset that they were going to acquire, the money was going to be protected, so that number one, nobody can steal it, and number two, that they can't just go out and frivolously spend the money. So I think of things that other realtors don't, just because I was a practicing CPA for over 50 years. And I know I keep saying that. By the way, it's good if I give you my contact information. My name is Paul Levine. My telephone number is 818-298-4000. And my email address is plevinerealtor@gmail.com. And if you call me, please do not call before 10 o'clock in the morning, and please do not call when Notre Dame football is on, and that starts in a number of weeks. Anyway, so that was one story. And then I go farther than anyone else in doing what I do for my clients. I had one of my clients, I negotiated the sale of this accounting client to this company in Delaware called E.I. DuPont, huge corporation. And there were four gentlemen on one side of the table, and I was sitting on the other side of the table with my client, and we negotiated a deal for $8.6 million, and that was back in 1984. So $8.6 million was a lot. And after the sale was over, about 3 or 4 weeks later, I got a phone call from a head corporate counsel from DuPont telling me that my client's wife purchased some stock prior to the acquisition and that my client has to pay an additional $250,000 in income tax because of something called phantom income. And he was right. But I said, let me call you back. And I called my client and I told my client of the situation. And my last 3 words to my client, and my client and I were like this, was, can I play? And he said, yes. So I called this fellow back and I said, I'm not picking up the income, knowing full well I'm not going to file a tax return for my client as paid preparer and not have $250,000 of tax that should be on here. But that fellow didn't know that. So I said, I'm not picking it up. And he goes, you have to. And we went back and forth about 3 times. And then I said, do you know what it sounds like when a phone hangs up? And I hung up on him. And then about 3 weeks later, he calls me back and we had the same discussion saying, I'm not picking it up. And finally, I tell him that, remember how we ended the last conversation, and I hung up on him again. Well, if anybody knows Los Angeles, my office was in an area called Century City, and I was living in a place called Marina del Rey. And one night I went on my way home, I stopped off at my favorite watering hole, and I had a few drinks and a nice dinner. And I made it home at midnight I made it home at midnight from a message from my client saying I should call him in Wilmington, Delaware, no matter what time it was. Well, it was 3 a.m. there, but he said no matter what time. So I called and he picked up the phone and I said, I woke you. And he said, no expletive, let me get back to you. He got back on the phone a minute later and he said, they don't like you here. And I said, it's not a popularity contest. And he said, they made him an offer. I won't go through all the mathematics, but the offer was that they gave him a check, a salary check for $562,000, which after all income taxes came out to $250,000, and they paid my client's tax. It was my client's tax to pay, but I got them to pay it, and who's going to be there for you like that? Again, my name is Paul Levine. My telephone number is 818-298-4000, and my email address is plevinerealtor@gmail.com. Hey, Greg.
Hey there, I'm back. Yeah, so you're looking. So I would say if you're looking for somebody to work with you, right? Do you want to be? You can give them advice on their taxes.
Well, I can give them advice on their taxes, but also all taxes related to real estate transactions.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of CPAs don't know those rules because they don't have that many clients dealing with real estate transactions, and I do.
Yes. So call you at the phone number that's scrolling on the screen.
Yep, and I see it says, but do not call when Notre Dame is playing football on TV. That's what I'll be known as in the future.
There we go.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you very much, and we'll do this again.
You betcha. Thank you.